The Hunter Gracchus. 2 boys were sitting on the harbour wall playing with dice. A man was reading a newspaper on the steps of the monument, resting in the shadow of a hero who was flourishing his sword on high. A girl was filling her bucket at the fountain. A fruit seller was lying beside his wares, gazing at the lake. Through the vacant window and door openings of a cafe, one could see 2 men, quite at the back, drinking their wine. The proprietor was sitting at a table in front and dozing. A bark was silently making for the little harbour, as if borne by invisible means over the water. A man in a blue blouse climbed ashore and drew the rope through a ring. Behind the boatman, 2 other men in dark coats with silver buttons carried a bier, on which, beneath a great flower-patterned fringed silk cloth, a man was apparently lying. Nobody on the quay troubled about the newcomers. Even when they lowered the bier to wait for the boatman, who was still occupied with his rope, nobody went nearer, nobody asked them a question, nobody accorded them an inquisitive glance. The pilot was still further detained by a woman who, a child at her breast, now appeared with loosened hair on the deck of the boat. Then he advanced and indicated a yellowish, 2-storied house that rose abruptly on the left near the water. The bearers took up their burden and bore it to the low but gracefully pillared door. A little boy opened a window just in time to see the party vanishing into the house, then hastily shut the window again. The door was now shut. It was of black oak and very strongly made. A flock of doves, which had been flying around the belfry, alighted in the street before the house. As if their food was stored within, they assembled in front of the door. One of them flew up to the 1st story and pecked at the window pane. They were bright-hued, well-tended, lively birds. The woman on the boat flung grain to them in a wide sweep. They ate it up and flew across to the woman. A man in a top hat tied with a black band of black crepe now descended one of the narrow and very steep lanes that led to the harbour. He glanced around vigilantly. Everything seemed to distress him. His mouth twisted at the sight of some offal in a corner. Fruit skins were lying on the steps of the monument. He swept them off in passing with his stick. He rapped at the house door, at the same time taking his top hat from his head with his black-gloved hand. The door was opened at once, and some 50 little boys appeared in 2 rows in the long entry hall, and bowed to him. The boatman descended the stairs, greeted the gentleman in black, conducted him up to the 1st story, led him around the bright and elegant loggia which encircled the courtyard, and both of them entered, while the boys pressed after them, at a respectful distance, a cool, spacious room looking towards the back, from whose window no habitation, but only a bare, blackish-grey, rocky wall was to be seen. The bearers were busied in setting up the light and lighting several long candles at the head of the bier. Yet these did not give light, but only disturbed the shadows, which had been immobile till then, and made them flicker over the walls. The cloth covering the bier had been thrown back. Lying on it was a man with wildly matted hair, who looked somewhat like a hunter. He lay without motion, and, it seemed, without breathing, his eyes closed. Yet only his trappings indicated that this man was probably dead. The gentleman stepped up to the bier, laid his hand on the brow of the man lying upon it, then kneeled down and prayed. The boatman made a sign to the bearers to leave the room. They went out, drove away the boys who had gathered outside, and shut the door. But even that did not seem to satisfy the gentleman. He glanced at the boatman. The boatman understood, and vanished through a side door into the next room. At once the man on the bier opened his eyes, turned his face painfully toward the gentleman, and said, "Who are you? Without any mark of surprise, the gentleman rose from his kneeling posture and answered, "The burgomaster of Riva." The man on the bier nodded, indicated a chair with a feeble movement of his arm, and said, after the burgomaster had accepted his invitation, "I knew that, of course, burgomaster, but in the first moments of returning consciousness I always forget. Everything goes around before my eyes, and it is best to ask about anything even if I know. You too probably know that I am the Hunter Gracchus." "Certainly," said the burgomaster. "Your arrival was announced to me during the night. We had been asleep for a good while. Then, toward midnight, my wife cried, 'Salvatore,' that's my name, 'look at that dove at the window.' It was really a dove, but as big as a cock. It flew over me and said in my ear, 'Tomorrow the dead Hunter Gracchus is coming. Receive him in the name of the city.' The hunter nodded and licked his lips with the tip of his tongue. 'Yes, the doves flew here before me. But do you believe, burgomaster, that I shall remain in Riva?' 'I cannot say that yet,' replied the burgomaster. 'Are you dead?' 'Yes,' said the hunter. 'As you see, many years ago, yes, it must be a great many years ago, I fell from a precipice in the Black Forest, that is in Germany, when I was hunting a chamois. Since then I have been dead.' 'But you are alive too,' said the burgomaster. 'In a certain sense,' said the hunter. 'In a certain sense I am alive too. My death ship lost its way. A wrong turn of the wheel, a moment's absence of mind on the pilot's part, the distraction of my lovely native country. I cannot tell what it was. I only know this, that I remained on earth, and that ever since my ship has sailed earthly waters. So I, who ask for nothing better than to live among my mountains, travel after my death through all the lands of the earth.' 'And you have no part in the other world?' asked the burgomaster, knitting his brow. 'I am for ever,' replied the hunter, 'on the great stair that leads up to it. On that infinitely wide and spacious stair I clamber about, sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes on the right, sometimes on the left, always in motion. The hunter has been turned into a butterfly. Do not laugh.' 'I am not laughing,' said the burgomaster in self-defence. 'That is very good of you,' said the hunter. 'I am always in motion, but when I make a supreme flight and see the gate actually shining before me, I awaken presently on my old ship, still stranded forlornly in some earthly sea or other. The fundamental error of my one-time death grins at me as I lie in my cabin. Julia, the wife of the pilot, knocks at the door and brings me on my bier the morning drink of the land whose coasts we chance to be passing. I lie on a wooden pallet. I wear, it cannot be a pleasure to look at me, a filthy winding sheet. My hair and beard, black tinged with grey, have grown together inextricably. My limbs are covered with a great flowered patterned woman's shawl, with long fringes. A sacramental candle stands at my head and lights me. On the wall opposite me is a little picture, evidently of a bushman, who is aiming his spear at me and taking cover as best he can behind a beautifully painted shield. On shipboard, one often comes across silly pictures, but that is the silliest of them all. Otherwise my wooden cage is quite empty. Through a hole in the side the warm airs of the southern night come in, and I hear the water slapping against the old boat. I have lain here ever since the time when, as the Hunter Gracchus living in the Black Forest, I followed a chamois and fell from a precipice. Everything happened in good order. I pursued, I fell, bled to death in a ravine, died, and this ship should have conveyed me to the next world. I can remember how gladly I stretched myself out on this pallet for the first time. Never did the mountains listen to such songs from me as these shadowy walls did then. I had been glad to live, and I was glad to die. Before I stepped aboard, I joyfully flung away my wretched load of ammunition, my knapsack, my hunting rifle that I had always been proud to carry, and I slipped into my winding sheet like a girl into her marriage dress. I lay and waited. Then came the mishap. "A terrible fate," said the burgomaster, raising his hand defensively. "And you bear no blame for it?" "None," said the hunter. "I was a hunter. Was there any sin in that? I followed my calling as a hunter in the Black Forest. Where there were still wolves in those days. I lay in ambush, shot, hit my mark, flayed the skin of my victims. Was there any sin in that? My labours were blessed. The great hunter of the Black Forest was the name I was given. Was there any sin in that? I am not called upon to decide that, said the burgomaster. But to me also there seems to be no sin in such things. But then, whose is the guilt? The boatman's, said the hunter. Nobody will read what I say here. No one will come to help me. Even if all the people were commanded to help me, every door and window would remain shut. Everybody would take to bed and draw the bedclothes over his head. The whole earth would become an inn for a night. And there is sense in that, for nobody knows of me, and if anyone knew, he would not know where I could be found, and if he knew where I could be found, he would not know how to deal with me. He would not know how to help me. The thought of helping me is an illness that has to be cured by taking to one's bed. I know that, and so I do not shout to summon help, even though at moments, when I lose control over myself, as I have done just now, for instance, I think seriously of it. But to drive out such thoughts I need only look around me and verify where I am, and, I can safely assert, have been for hundreds of years. Extraordinary, said the burgomaster, extraordinary. And now do you think of staying here in Riva with us? I think not, said the hunter, with a smile, and, to excuse himself, he laid his hand on the burgomaster's knee. I am here. More than that I do not know. Further than that I cannot go. My ship has no rudder, and it is driven by the wind that blows in the undermost regions of death.